Most of us think we know what a hard winter feels like. You might picture a car buried in a drift, or a power outage that lasts a few shivering days. But what happened in the Rocky Mountains in 1836 wasn't just a season, it was a siege. That year, the high country buried hundreds of seasoned frontiersmen under snowpacks so massive they obliterated the landmarks leading to shelter. Men didn't just freeze, they vanished. Some resorted to boiling their own moccasins into a gluey paste just to put something in their stomachs. Tonight, we are reconstructing the survival of a small band of mountain men who endured the deadliest winter in the history of the American frontier. If exploring the darker, grittier corners of history keeps you up at night, go ahead and hit subscribe. I'm interested in your context. Where in the world are you listening from? Drop your city and the current time below. It's always fascinating to see how far these stories travel. Right now, I'm guessing you're comfortable. You're likely climate-controlled, surrounded by soft textures, with clean water a few steps away, and a refrigerator humming in the kitchen. That safety is an illusion we're about to strip away. Tonight, we are transporting you to a reality where the landscape is not a scenic backdrop, but an active predator. A place where the only buffer between you and a frozen grave is your grit and the grease in your rifle. Get settled. You are about to spend the winter of 1836 with the hardest men to ever walk the American West. By sunrise, you'll understand the true price of survival. The warning doesn't come visually. It hits your nose first. It's September 1836, and you were standing on the silty banks of the Green River in the unmapped territory that will one day be Wyoming. To the untrained eye, it's just wilderness, a sprawling canvas of sagebrush and pine stretching toward a jagged horizon. But to you, Elijah Morgan, a 23-year-old trapper with 2 seasons of mountain experience etched into your skin, the air tastes wrong. The Summer Rendezvous, that raucous annual trade fair where mountain men, fur companies, and indigenous tribes gather to swap pelts for whiskey and gunpowder, ended 3 weeks ago, and the mood was grim. The supply caravans from St. Louis were light this year. The traders were stingy. Rumors are drifting in from the East Coast in Europe that the era of the beaver hat is dying. The whims of Parisian fashion are shifting to silk. The price of plues, mountain slang for beaver pelts, is dropping. You don't care about French fashion. You care about the debt on your books and the $300 worth of fur you need to harvest to stay solvent. But as you watch the Green River churn in the pale morning light, economics take a back seat to instinct. There is a metallic sharpness in the air, a barometric heaviness that presses against your lungs. The veterans call it the iron sky. It smells like a blizzard waiting in the wings, threatening to descend from the high peaks weeks before it should. You are currently attached to a brigade led by the legendary Jim Bridger. There are about 30 of you, trappers, skinners, and camp keepers, preparing to push north toward the Yellowstone drainage. Bridger is standing near the smoldering campfire, deep in conversation with a Crow scout who rode in under the cover of dawn. Even from 50 feet away, you can see the tension in Bridger's posture. This is a man who is practically immortal in mountain lore. He once carried a 3-inch Blackfoot arrowhead lodged in his back for 3 years before a doctor cut it out, and he barely complained. He has navigated these peaks since he was a teenager. If Jim Bridger looks worried, you should be terrified. You down the last of your coffee, a watery, bitter brew because rations were cut at the rendezvous, and toss the dregs into the fire. "Morgan," Bridger barks, "front and center." You walk over, feeling the gaze of the Crow scout. His name is Two Horses, a man who has read the moods of these mountains for 40 years. Bridger cuts straight to the point. The Crow are pulling out. They say a white death is coming. The indigenous tribes don't rely on guesswork. They rely on biological data gathered over centuries. The signs are everywhere, if you know where to look. The beaver are building their lodges twice as thick as last year. The elk herds are already drifting to the lower basins. The squirrels are caching pine nuts with a frantic intensity. How bad, you ask? Bridger doesn't answer immediately. He looks at the scout, whose silence is louder than any shout. The Crow are moving their entire village to the lowlands, abandoning the shelter of the valleys for the open plains to escape the coming snow load. That never happens. Bad enough, Bridger finally grunts. But we aren't leaving. We trap. It's a suicide pact disguised as a business plan. We trap, Bridger continues, rubbing a stiff shoulder joint that flares up when the pressure drops. But we change the strategy. We head for the Yellowstone country now. We build the wintering cabins early, fortresses, not shacks. We hunt meat until we can't carry any more. And we pray the Crow are exaggerating. He turns away, dismissing you. You stare up at the peaks. They are stoic, majestic, and completely indifferent to your existence. You've survived 2 winters here already. The first cost you 2 toes to frostbite. The phantom pain still throbs when the mercury drops. The second taught you the rhythm of the cold. But this feels different. The silence of the scout and the anxiety in Bridger's eyes suggest that your previous experience might not be enough to save you this time. The brigade moves out an hour later. It's a caravan of organized chaos. 30 hard men, 60 pack horses laden with gear, 200 heavy steel traps, and kegs of Galena lead. You have enough dried buffalo meat to last 6 weeks. After that, the equation is simple. You kill or you starve. This is the contract you signed. You came west for the freedom and the potential of a fortune, but the tax on that freedom is paid in risk. The journey north is a 3-week slog through terrain that defies description. You follow ancient game trails and indigenous routes that exist only in the memories of men like Bridger, who carries a mental map of the Rockies, more accurate than any chart in Washington, D.C. You check your gear as you ride. A heavy Hawken rifle across your saddle, a Green River skinning knife on your hip, and your possibles bag containing the essentials of life: flint, steel, lead bars, and a small worn Bible your mother packed for you. You haven't read it much, but before the spring thaw, you'll likely memorize every page. As you climb in elevation, the world changes. The air thins, becoming sharp and biting. By October, your breath clouds in front of you at high noon. The work is relentless. You are setting trap lines in freezing streams, wading into water that turns your legs numb in seconds, baiting the pans with castoreum to lure the beaver. It's brutal labor, but the payout keeps you going. A prime plew can fetch $4 or $5. A skilled trapper can pull 60 pelts in a good season. That's $300, a sum that could buy a farm and a quiet life back in Missouri. That's the dream everyone talks about. One last big haul, then retirement. But few ever leave. The mountains hook you. The adrenaline becomes a necessity. By early November, the brigade reaches the Yellowstone Plateau. It is a place of stark, violent beauty. The valley offers timber for building and protection from the prevailing winds, but its most crucial feature is the geology. This is Coulter's Hell, a land of geysers and hot springs where boiling water bubbles up from the Earth's crust. In a worst-case scenario, the heat from this ground can keep a man from freezing to death. Construction begins immediately. You aren't building temporary shelters, you are building for a siege. The crew works in shifts, felling lodgepole pines and dragging them to the site. You cut logs 8 inches thick, notching the ends with precision so they lock together tight. Every gap between the timbers is chinked with a mixture of mud, grass, and moss, primitive insulation that dries as hard as concrete. This cabin will be your universe for the next 5 months. Outside, the sky is turning a bruised purple and the temperature is plummeting. The smell of snow is gone, replaced by the physical presence of the storm. The first flakes begin to fall as you lay the last roof beam. The crow were right. The white death has arrived, and the door is shutting on the world. You finish the roof with a crude layering of lodgepole pine, stripped bark, and packed earth. If the geology is kind, you stack flat river stones into a chimney. If not, you dig a fire pit in the dirt floor and accept that your lungs will burn with smoke for the next 5 months. The finished cabin is a claustrophobic box, barely 10 feet by 12, which you now share with 2 other souls, Jacob Hawkins and William Cole. The dynamic is precarious. Hawkins is a 5-year veteran of the high country, a man who speaks little and wastes no movement. Cole is a greenhorn, fresh from the east, still fumbling with the mechanics of his trap springs. You sit somewhere in the middle, no longer a novice, but not yet hardened into the leather-skinned survivor Hawkins is. For 2 weeks, the 3 of you operate like a single organism, felling timber, chinking gaps, and smoking elk meat until the rafters hang heavy with rawhide-wrapped sustenance. By mid-November, the structure is complete. It is squat, dark, and ugly, but it is the only thing separating you from the void. The first night in the finished cabin feels like a victory. You feast on roasted elk steaks and drink the last of the strong coffee, sweetened with a hoard of sugar Cole saved from the rendezvous. Laughter bounces off the fresh logs. For a few hours, you indulge in the collective delusion that this winter will be routine, just another season of cards, storytelling, and waiting for the thaw. But the denial is fragile. You've all seen the biological indicators. The beaver pelts are unnaturally dense. The squirrels are caching nuts with a manic, desperate energy. A band of Shoshone passed through days ago, refusing to trade, their eyes fixed on the lowlands as they fled the high peaks. The Crow Scout wasn't guessing, he was reading a script written by the land itself. Later, when Hawkins and Cole are asleep, you lie awake on a mattress of pine boughs, wrapped in a buffalo robe. The fire has died down to a bed of glowing eyes. You stare at the ceiling, 6 feet above, listening to the wind probe the chinking for a weakness. Your mind drifts back to Missouri, the humidity of the summers, the smell of your mother's kitchen, the naive boy who left it all behind at 21. You came west for adventure, but the frontier has exacted a heavy toll. You've taken 2 lives in self-defense, necessary kills, but they hang on your conscience like lead weights. Now, at 23, you are lying in a wooden crate at the edge of the known world, waiting to see if nature intends to let you live. It begins innocuously, a whisper of white dust drifting through the black trees. When you crack the door at dawn, there is an inch on the ground. By noon, it's shin deep. By dusk, a foot. By the following morning, 2 feet of heavy, wet snow has entombed the valley, and the sky is still churning. This is not the dry champagne powder of a ski resort. This is a heavy, industrial crushing weight that bends saplings until they snap. For 3 days, the storm is relentless. You work in shifts, shoveling a trench to the woodpile, terrified that if you stop, the tunnel will collapse. The cabin groans under the load, the timbers popping like gunshots as the weight settles. When the sun finally breaks on the 4th day, the world has been erased. The river is gone, buried under drifts that bridge the banks. The silence is absolute, acoustic dampening so profound it rings in your ears. The temperature plummets, a deep molecular cold that bypasses your skin and settles in the marrow. Jacob steps out beside you, his breath instantly crystallizing in the air. "This is just the start," he murmurs. He is right. November bleeds into December, bringing 3 more storm systems, each more violent than the last. The valley floor is now waist-deep in powder. The passes are impassable, buried under 10 feet of drift. The river freezes solid, turning into a treacherous highway of ice that can support a horse or swallow a man who misjudges the thickness. The ecosystem collapses. The elk and deer have fled to the foothills, out of your reach. The rabbits have gone subterranean. The only things moving in this frozen hellscape are you and the wolves. You hear them before you see them. A chorus of howls that starts in the distant timber and swells until the air vibrates. It is a haunting, primal song of hunger. One morning you find tracks circling the cabin, paw prints the size of saucers stopping right at the door. They were sniffing the threshold while you slept, calculating the strength of your latch. You stop going out alone. Life shrinks to a grim routine. Wake, melt snow, ration food, check the empty traps, return before the early sunset swallows the light. In the long, suffocating hours of darkness, you swap stories to keep the madness at bay. Jacob talks of a lost love in St. Louis. Cole babbles about the fortune he'll spend when he returns to civilization. No one talks about the gnawing hunger or the fear that the woodpile won't last. Then the mountains take their first tax. A trapper from the Maine Brigade, a quiet man named Charles from Kentucky, fails to return from his line. You find him 3 days later, a half-mile from camp. He had punched through the river ice, soaked his leathers, and frozen before he could spark a fire. He is curled at the base of a fir tree, solid as stone, looking like he simply sat down for a nap. The ground is frozen too hard to dig a grave, so you pile rocks over his body to keep the scavengers at bay, though you know the wolves will eventually win. Christmas passes without celebration. There is no feast, only the howling wind and the mesmerizing dance of the flames. By late December, you stop measuring the snow in feet. It is simply everywhere. The drifts are now chest-high against the cabin walls. But the real enemy is no longer the cold, it is the math. You have eaten through half your provisions and the game is gone. The trap lines are empty. You are 3 men in a box, buried in a white tomb, watching your food supply dwindle ounce by ounce. And winter has only just begun. Supplies are critically low. That cache of dried elk meat, which looked like a king's ransom back in November, has dwindled to perhaps 2 weeks of sustenance. The dynamic in the cabin shifts from camaraderie to suspicious vigilance. Jacob has taken charge of the inventory, counting out the strips of jerky every morning with the precision of a bank teller handling gold bullion. He watches you eat, his eyes tracking every bite, ensuring you don't exceed your ration. You don't resent him for it. In fact, you watch him just as closely. Hunger changes the way you look at a friend. It turns them into a competitor for resources. And then there is the cold.
You thought you understood winter after 2 seasons in the Rockies. You know the sting of frostbite and the sensation of your beard freezing into a mask of ice. But this is a different beast entirely. This cold feels sentient. It hunts for thermal weaknesses, probing every chink in the logs and every stitch in your leathers. The drop in temperature is so violent that the moisture inside the logs expands and explodes. All night long, the cabin sounds like it's under musket fire as the timber cracks. Your water bucket doesn't just get a skim of ice, it freezes solid within an hour of being brought indoors.
One morning, you wake to a dead fire. The temperature inside the cabin has plummeted so severely that your buffalo robe is rigid, frozen stiff by the moisture of your own exhaled breath. You can't feel your feet. You spend 20 agonizing minutes massaging life back into your toes near the rekindled hearth, terrified that you'll look down and see the black discoloration of gangrene. You keep your toes, but it was a near miss. Too near. That afternoon, Jim Bridger calls for a general assembly. It takes an hour for the brigade to gather, men stumbling out of their snowbound shacks, wrapped in so many layers of fur and wool that they look more like bears than humans. Only their eyes are visible, peering out from scarves crusted with ice. You try to do a head count, but it's difficult in the swirling drift. Still, the gaps in the line are obvious. Charles is gone. 2 hunters who ventured out last week vanished into the white void. Another man, a greenhorn whose name you barely knew, froze to death in his sleep when his fire died, his cabin mates too exhausted and hypothermic to notice. The brigade is shrinking. Bridger stands at the center, looking aged beyond his years. The burden of command is heavy. Every frozen corpse is a weight on his conscience. "The cabins aren't working," he announces, his voice raspy. "The walls are too thin. We're burning wood faster than we can gather it. If we stay like this, we die." Bridger proposes a radical solution, a technique he learned from the Inuit tribes of the far north and has seen used by the Crow. "We bury the cabins," he says flatly. "Snow holds air, air holds heat. A buried cabin stays warm." Jacob speaks up, voicing the skepticism of the group. "You want us to shovel snow onto the roof?" "I want you to turn your cabin into a cave," counters Bridger. "Cover everything but the door and the chimney. Pack it tight." The fear in the group is palpable. The men are worried about structural failure, about the roof beams snapping under the crushing weight of the snow, burying them alive. Bridger cuts the debate short. "If you build it right, it holds. If you don't do it, you freeze. Take your pick." You walk back to the cabin with Jacob and William in silence. Inside, huddled around a weak fire, William asks the question hanging in the air. "Do we do it?" Jacob stares into the flames. "I think we're going to die if we don't." The next morning, the work begins. It is brutal, calorie-burning labor performed by men who are already starving. But the concept is sound. Instead of shoveling the snow away from your walls, you shovel it against them. You pack it down layer by layer, creating a thick, dense berm. You start with the north wall, the side that takes the brunt of the wind. You pile the snow 3 feet thick, turning the cabin wall into a sloping white ramp. By evening, the logs are invisible. You retreat inside and wait. The effect is immediate. The bleeding of heat stops. The wind can no longer strip the warmth from the timber. The temperature inside rises, not to a tropical level, but enough that you can unclench your muscles. The water bucket remains liquid. "It works," William whispers, sounding stunned. For the first time in weeks, the fear of immediate freezing recedes. Over the next week, you bury the entire structure. The roof is the most dangerous part. You work delicately, distributing the weight, praying the lodgepole pines hold. When you are finished, the cabin is gone. To an observer on the ridge, the camp has vanished, replaced by a field of large white mounds, each venting a thin trail of smoke. It looks like a graveyard, but inside, it feels like salvation. The science of it is ancient and flawless. Snow is composed of ice crystals and trapped air. That trapped air is a phenomenal insulator. By encasing the cabin in snow, you have essentially wrapped your home in a down comforter. The difference in temperature is staggering, sometimes 20 or 30 degrees warmer than the outside air. You can sleep without the buffalo robe pulled over your head. You can survive. But every solution in the mountains comes with a new danger. By sealing the cabin, you have cut off the natural ventilation. Before, the drafts that froze you also kept you alive by carrying away the wood smoke. Now the cabin is airtight. The only exit for the smoke is the chimney. But the chimney is fighting the snow too. Drifts clog the opening. Ice rimes the rim. One night, the inevitable happens. You wake up not from cold, but from a violent gagging sensation. The cabin is filled with thick, acrid smoke. You can't see your hand in front of your face. Panic sets in, the primal panic of a drowning man. You stumble blindly toward the door, lungs burning, kicking William awake as you go. You burst out into the freezing night, gasping for clean air, retching on the snow. Jacob and William tumble out behind you, coughing until they can barely stand. You have solved the cold, but you have built a gas chamber. Now, survival requires a new routine. Constant vigilance of the chimney, sleep shifts to watch the fire, and the terrifying knowledge that the thing keeping you warm is trying to suffocate you. And winter is nowhere near done. The realization hits the group in silence. Half-dressed and shivering in the lethal air, you stare at the chimney opening. It is blocked. A single night of heavy snowfall has bridged the gap, sealing you inside with the fumes. You scramble onto the roof, barefoot and desperate, clawing the blockage clear until the smoke vents again. From that moment, sleep becomes a tactical operation. You designate a sentry. One man stays awake, armed with a long lodgepole pine stick, tasked with poking the chimney hole clear every hour. It works, mostly, but the margin for error is razor thin. You learn just how thin a few days later. Across the valley, another group of 4 seasoned trappers, led by a decent man named Robert Hayes, had buried their cabin just like yours. They took the same precautions, but one morning their smoke stops rising. You volunteer to check on them, driven by a debt of gratitude for tobacco Hayes once shared. The 2-hour trek through chest-deep drifts leaves you exhausted, but the scene inside the cabin freezes your blood. The door is iced shut. You have to shoulder it open. Inside, the air is stagnant and heavy. The fire is dead. Frost coats the walls, the floor, and the 4 men lying in their bunks. There is no violence, no signs of struggle. Robert Hayes lies with his buffalo robe pulled to his chin, looking for all the world like he is deep in a peaceful dream. But his skin is the color of wet ash, and when you touch him, he is solid rock. They all are. The fire consumed the oxygen and replaced it with an invisible, odorless killer before they even knew to wake up. Bridger calls it bad air. He explains that the fire eats the breath out of the room. You don't have the vocabulary for carbon monoxide poisoning, but you understand the physics of the dead bodies. You help pile rocks over Hayes and his men because the ground is too hard to dig, and then you trudge back to your own snow tomb with a terrifying realization. The thing keeping you alive is also hunting you. That night, you change the protocol. You crack the door an inch, hanging a buffalo robe over the gap to baffle the wind. It lets the freezing cold in, dropping the cabin temperature sharply, but it brings oxygen with it. You choose to shiver rather than never wake up. The other consequence of burying the cabin is the darkness. Before, the daylight offered a weak, gray illumination through the chinking. Now, buried under 5 feet of snow, the sun ceases to exist. Day and night dissolve into a single seamless block of shadow, broken only by the orange glow of the hearth. You can't burn the fire high just for light. Fuel is too precious. So you exist in a cave-like gloom, listening to the wind scream above the snowpack. The sensory deprivation begins to rot the mind. William starts murmuring to people who aren't there, his mother, a dead brother, a girl in Ohio. You and Jacob pretend not to hear it, because acknowledging the madness might let it in. To pass the time, you mend gear by touch, your fingers navigating the tears in the leather by memory. You replay the same 3 card games until the edges of the deck are soft as felt. But mostly, you sit. You sit in the dark and try not to think about the timeline. One evening, the silence breaks. "We aren't going to make it," Jacob says quietly. You don't argue. The math is undeniable. The food is almost gone. The game has vanished. Spring is an eternity away. "We have 2 weeks of food," Jacob continues, his voice devoid of emotion. "Then we eat the horses. Then we starve." William suggests trying for the lower valleys, but it's a fantasy. A 3-day trek in this snow without food is a death sentence. The conversation dies in the dark, leaving only the sound of your own breathing and the distant, mocking howl of the wolf pack. They are out there, waiting for the calorie count to hit 0. By January, the woodpile is in critical condition. The stockpile you thought would last until April is decimated. Every trip to the deadfall timber is a torture session. A 10-minute walk in summer is now an hour-long battle through drifts that suck the heat from your core. After one such trip, Jacob spends 2 hours shaking so violently he can't hold a cup. "Can't keep doing this," he stammers. "The cold will get us before the hunger does." Desperation breeds innovation. You remember the fat, 5 pounds of rendered buffalo and elk tallow stored in a frozen leather pouch. It was meant to be emergency rations, the last thing you'd eat before boiling your boots. But fat burns. You place a strip of the hard, waxy tallow in a stone dish and touch a burning twig to it. It sputters, then catches. A greasy yellow flame leaps up. It's a pathetic light compared to a lantern, unsteady and dim. But in the absolute void of the buried cabin, it is a miracle. You can see faces again. You can navigate the room. But the cost is high. The burning fat releases a thick, oily smoke that clings to everything. Within days, the cabin interior is coated in a layer of black soot. It stains your skin, your clothes, and your mucus. You blow your nose and it comes out gray. And the smell is horrific, a rancid, cloying stench of burning meat mixed with the sour funk of 3 unwashed men in curing hides. The air becomes a physical solid you have to push through, stinging your eyes and rasping your throat. "Reminds me of the chimney sweeps in St. Louis," Jacob says one morning, looking at his blackened hands, "except they get paid." You laugh because the alternative is screaming. Back east, this cabin would be condemned. Here, this toxic soot-choked hole is the only sanctuary you have. The fat lamp gives off heat, and heat is the only currency left. So you cough up the black phlegm, wipe your weeping eyes, and settle in. You have bought a little more time. but the bill is coming due. You settle into a state of suspended animation. You eat whatever meager portion Jacob decides is sustainable. You sit in the gloom, inhaling the greasy, rancid air. You wait. You trim the wick of the fat lamp when it gutters, and then you wait some more. Time loses its structure. Monday feels like Thursday, which feels like a void. The only reliable metric of time passing is the shrinking circumference of the meat pile and the dwindling fat pouch. To conserve resources, you start rationing the light itself. There is no point in burning valuable tallow while you sleep, so you extinguish the lamp at night. You learn to navigate the cabin by proprioception and memory. 3 steps from the bunk to the hearth, 2 steps to the water bucket, 4 steps to the frozen door. You move through your home like a ghost. William is disintegrating. He was never built for this. He's soft, a romantic who came west chasing a storybook adventure and found a horror story instead. The darkness is eroding his mind. At night, he mutters in his sleep, holding fractured conversations with people 1,000 miles away. Sometimes he weeps, quiet, choked sobs buried in his buffalo robe. You and Jacob pretend not to hear him. It isn't cruelty, it's a necessary numbness. There is nothing you can do to comfort him, and his despair is contagious. You have to wall yourself off to keep your own sanity intact. The food situation is shifting from tight to catastrophic. In November, you had nearly 200 pounds of dried elk, deer, and bison jerky. Enough, you thought, to coast until the thaw. You were wrong. By mid-January, the stock has collapsed to less than 50 pounds. Jacob counts the strips every morning, his lips moving in silent calculation. 2 strips for breakfast, 1 for dinner. Between those meals, there is nothing but hot water and the gnawing void in your gut. The hunger changes. It stops being the sharp, urgent pangs of a missed lunch and settles into a deep, systemic ache. It makes your thoughts sluggish and your muscles heavy. Your brain, starved of glucose, begins to hallucinate feast days. You wake up with saliva pooling in your mouth, dreaming of fried chicken, biscuits swimming in sausage gravy, and apple pie fresh from a Dutch oven, tastes you haven't experienced in years. You have a small sack of flour left, maybe 3 cups, hoarded like diamond dust since the rendezvous. You mix it with melted snow to create a gray paste and cook it on a flat slate by the fire. The trappers call it mountain bread. It tastes like scorched glue, but it sits heavy in the stomach for an hour, tricking your body into feeling full. The coffee ran out a week ago, and that loss hits harder than the hunger. Coffee was civilization. It was the ritual that separated morning from night. Now you drink hot water tea, melted snow sipped slowly. It warms your core for a few minutes, but it offers no comfort. The pemmican, that dense mixture of pounded meat, fat, and berries, is holding out, but barely. It is the ultimate survival fuel, calorie-dense and imperishable, but you are burning it simply to sit still. A week ago, you tried to change the equation. You strapped on your snowshoes, heavy, rawhide webbed bear paws, and fought your way up the valley, rifle in hand. It was a 4-hour ordeal, wading through drifts that sucked the energy from your legs. You saw nothing, no deer, no rabbits, not even a bird. The mountains have been scrubbed clean of life. The game has migrated to the lowlands or is buried deep beneath the snowpack. You returned empty-handed, exhausted, having burned calories you couldn't afford to lose. The realization is absolute. You are the only living things left in this valley. There is, of course, one source of food left. Outside, huddled in a crude lean-to, are 4 horses. They are skeletal now, surviving on bark and dead grass dug out from under the snow. But a horse represents roughly 300 pounds of meat. Butchered and preserved, they could feed the 3 of you until April. But the horse is also your exit strategy. Without them, you are stranded in the wilderness with hundreds of pounds of beaver pelts and no way to transport them to market. Eating the horses means surviving the winter only to face financial ruin or a death march in the spring. Jacob broaches the subject one night as the wind hammers the roof. We need to talk about the stock. William's head snaps up. His face is gaunt, his eyes sunken into dark orbits. No, I'm not eating him. I'm not saying we do it tonight, Jacob says calmly. I'm saying we need a threshold, a plan. He's all I have left, William pleads, his voice cracking. My father gave him to me. I promised I'd ride him home. Your father would rather have you walk home than be buried here, you say. You don't know him, William spits back. The conversation dies, but the math hangs in the smoky air. What happens when the jerky runs out? Nature, indifferent as always, makes the choice for you. The next morning, you find William's horse lying on its side in the paddock. Its legs are stiff, its eyes open and frosted over. The cold and malnutrition finally shut its heart down in the night. William doesn't speak when you tell him. He stares at you, a vacant look in his eyes, and turns his face to the log wall. Jacob looks at you, and the understanding is silent but total. It takes all day to process the carcass. The meat is already frozen solid, turning the butchery into hard labor with axes and heavy knives. But the cold also means the meat won't spoil. You stack nearly 200 pounds of dark red protein in the snowbank outside the door. William refuses to eat that first night. He sits in the corner, wrapped in his robe, staring at nothing. But starvation has no principles. By the second night, he eats. Horse meat is different from elk or buffalo. It is sweeter, richer in glycogen, and surprisingly tender. The animal had little fat left on its ribs, but you render every scrap of it for the lamps. You take the heavy leg bones and boil them for hours, smashing them to get at the marrow, creating a rich, cloudy broth that seems to bring life back into your frozen limbs. You waste nothing. In this world, waste is a sin punishable by death. You have bought another month of life. But as you sip the broth and watch the fire, you wonder, what goes into the pot when the horse is gone? A week later, attrition claims another victim. The second horse lies down in the night and refuses to rise, its heart simply stopping under the strain of cold and calorie deficit. You butcher it with the same grim efficiency as the first, adding the frozen slabs to the stockpile. You try to suppress the implications. You are down to 2 horses now, 2 mounts for 3 men. If the spring thaw comes and the passes open, someone will be walking out of these mountains. But that is a problem for April. Right now, your problems are immediate and visceral. The fat lamp is guttering. The cabin walls are varnished in greasy soot. The air tastes like ash and desperation. And outside, the wolves have returned. They know. The scent of blood from the butchered horse has drawn them in like sharks. The pack has tightened its circle, their tracks now appearing within 20 feet of your door. They are probing your defenses, testing the range of your vigilance. You have learned their voices. There is the basso profondo of the alpha male, the high-pitched yipping of the juveniles, and the eerie, almost human wail of a female who always initiates the chorus. There are 6 or 7 of them, a coordinated, intelligent unit that understands the geometry of rifle fire. They stayed just out of range during the day, patient and calculating. They know you are weakening. They are waiting for a mistake. You clean your rifle for the third time today, checking the pan and the flint. You have 8 shots left, maybe 9. It's not enough to win a war against a pack, but it's enough to make it costly. February arrives without fanfare. There is no calendar to mark the passage of time, only the relentless accumulation of snow and the shrinking meat pile. The horse meat is running low. Despite Jacob's draconian rationing, small portions, thin broth, every bone boiled to chalk, the supply is failing. Jacob does the math one morning, his face hardening. 2 weeks, he says flatly, maybe less. William, who has been a ghost since his horse died, doesn't even look up. He eats when told, sleeps when allowed, and otherwise stares at the wall, a hollow shell of the boy who left Ohio. You nod. 2 weeks. And then? The answer is outside, shivering in the lean-to. 2 horses left. Alive, breathing, trusting. The thought of killing them turns your stomach, but the thought of starvation turns it more. But before you kill the horses, there is one final, desperate resource: the gear itself. Leather. Leather, after all, was once alive. It is collagen and protein, stretched and tanned. If you boil it long enough, it softens. If you chew it hard enough, it breaks down. If your stomach is desperate enough, it might extract a few calories of sustenance. You've heard the stories at the rendezvous, campfire tales of men eating their boots, told with a laugh and a shot of whiskey. It always seemed like a tall tale, a grotesque exaggeration for the greenhorns. Now it is your dinner menu. You start with your spare moccasins, high-quality elk hide saved for the spring trek. It feels like a violation to cut them up, destroying a tool that could save your feet to feed a belly that will be hungry again in an hour. But dead men don't need shoes. You slice the leather into finger-sized strips and drop them into a pot of boiling snow water. It cooks for hours, the cabin filling with a smell that is neither food nor rot, but something disturbing in between. The leather fights back. It stays tough, rubbery, refusing to be consumed. When it's ready, you ladle out the gray, murky broth and the strips of sodden hide. Dinner, Jacob announces. You put a strip in your mouth. The texture is revolting, like chewing on a tire. You have to grind it between your molars, tearing it apart with primal effort. The taste is a complex profile of despair: wood smoke, rancid grease, sweat, and dirt. Jacob takes a bite, chews for a solid minute, and then starts to laugh. It's a dry, rusty sound. "What?" William asks, his voice thin. "I'm eating a shoe," Jacob says, shaking his head. 2 years ago, I was drinking champagne in St. Louis with a girl on each arm. Now I'm eating footwear." "Was the champagne good?" "It was terrible, but better than this." You laugh too. It hurts your cracked lips, but the absurdity is the only thing that separates you from the wolves outside. You chew and chew and chew, trying to force your body to accept the unacceptable, knowing that this is the last stop before the end. You keep chewing because the alternative is the void, and you aren't ready to go there yet. When you finally force the bolus of masticated hide down your throat, your stomach doesn't know how to react. It's not nausea exactly, it's physiological confusion. Your digestive system is trying to process chemically treated skin as if it were steak. But here is the dark miracle. After an hour, the hunger recedes. It isn't sated, not really. You haven't consumed any real nutrients, just tough fibers and trace amounts of residual grease. But the gnawing agony pauses. You have tricked your body into thinking it has been fed. You aren't eating for nutrition or pleasure. You are eating to buy time, hour by hour. Over the next few days, you systematically consume your own inventory. The spare moccasins go first, then the worn-out pair you were wearing in October, their soles so thin you could feel every pebble through them. Then the equipment straps, then the pouches. You look at your knife sheath. It's a beautiful piece of work, beaver tail leather stitched by your father, your initials carved into the grain. It is a tangible connection to the Missouri farm you left behind. You cut it into strips and boil it. Survival has no room for sentimentality. William draws the line at his belt. It was a parting gift from Sarah, the girl in Ohio who promised to wait for him. He has worn it every day, touching the buckle like a talisman when the fear gets too loud. "I can't eat this," he whispers, turning the leather over in his soot-stained hands. "She stitched it herself." "She would want you to live," Jacob says. His voice is gentle, but there is steel underneath. "I know she wouldn't want you to starve to death clutching a strip of cowhide." William stares at the belt for a long time. The silence in the cabin is heavy, broken only by the wind moaning through the chimney. Finally, he hands it to you. "Cut it up," he says, his voice dead. "I can't do it." You take the belt. You feel the weight of the love and the labor in the stitching. Then you take your knife and sever the connection. When the sodden, boiled strips are ready, William eats his portion in silence, his eyes fixed on a world none of you can see. When the leather runs out, the strategy shifts. You turn to hunting, but not the kind you learned as a boy. The living game is gone, but in a winter this violent, gone doesn't mean absent, it means buried. Animals die. They freeze in their tracks, collapse in drifts, or succumb to exhaustion. Their bodies are out there, preserved in the cryostasis of the snowpack, waiting for someone desperate enough to excavate them. You aren't hunting anymore. You are grave robbing. You head out on the first clear morning in weeks. The sun is a blinding supernova reflecting off the ice, forcing you to squint against the glare. The cold is aggressive, freezing the moisture in your nose instantly. But you strap on your snowshoes and go. You scan the featureless white void for irregularities, a shadow that shouldn't be there, a hump that breaks the perfect curve of a drift. It takes 3 hours, but you find it. The tip of an antler and the curve of a shoulder protruding from a bank of snow. It's a bull elk. Judging by the depth of the burial, he died months ago, likely caught in an early blizzard. He must have frozen mid-stride, fighting the wind until his heart gave out, because he is still standing upright, entombed in white. His bad luck is your salvation. You don't have a shovel, so you use your knife, chipping away the hard-packed ice. It is grueling work. Your hands go numb, and you have to stop every few minutes to beat the circulation back into them, but you keep hacking. You uncover the beast layer by layer. The carcass is frozen as hard as oak. You have to chisel the meat off the bones, sending shards of red ice flying. It's messy work, chunks of flesh mixed with fur and frozen blood, but you don't care. You load 40 pounds of rock-hard protein onto a makeshift sled and drag it home as the sun begins to fail. You drop the frozen slabs by the fire. Jacob and William stare at the meat with the reverence usually reserved for religious icons. "Elk," you say, breathless. Dead a long time, but plenty of it. That night, you eat real food for the first time in months. The texture is wrong, mealy and strange from the freeze-thaw cycle, but the effect is electric. The protein hits your system like a drug. You eat until your stomach cramps, and then you eat a little more. The mood in the cabin transforms. The silence breaks. Jacob starts humming a tavern song from St. Louis. William actually smiles, a crack in the mask of depression he's worn since his horse died. "You know what I miss?" William asks suddenly. "Everything," Jacob answers. "Besides that, specific things." You think about it. A hot bath, clean sheets, the sound of rain that isn't freezing. "Apples," Jacob says, his eyes closed, fresh off the tree, that crunch when the skin breaks. William nods. "Music. I miss the fiddle. Remember dancing? It feels like a memory from a previous life, a hallucination, but you grab onto it. We'll dance again, you promise. Come summer, at the rendezvous, we find a fiddler and we dance until we drop." Promise, promise. It's a lie, or maybe a prayer, but in the smoky darkness of a buried cabin, it's enough. The next day, the entire crew goes out. You excavate the rest of the elk, hauling back nearly 200 pounds of meat. It's enough to last weeks if you ration it. But the elk was just the proof of concept. Now that your eyes are retrained, you see the dead everywhere. You find a deer with broken legs near the tree line. You dig out 2 rabbits, perfectly preserved, likely killed by a hawk and lost in a drift. You find the scavenged remains of a grouse. You dig them all up. You eat them all. You don't care how long they've been dead or what gnawed on them first. In the economy of survival, calories are the only currency that holds value, and you are finally solvent again. Your discovery isn't unique for long. Word bleeds through the valley, carried on the wind and through shoutouts between distant camps. Game exists, but it requires excavation. Soon the landscape is dotted with tracks leading away from the buried mounds, men armed with knives probing the snow like prospectors hunting for veins of frozen meat. Some find what they're looking for, others don't. You hear through the grapevine about a man named Foster. He walked out one morning and simply vanished. His partners found him 3 days later, face down in a drift a mile from safety. He had collapsed from exhaustion mid-dig, or perhaps the cold just shut him down. He is another statistic, another ghost. You don't mourn him. Grief is a calorie expenditure you can't afford. This is the new reality, digging for corpses, chewing on treated leather until your gums bleed, eating things that would make a buzzard hesitate, watching friends disintegrate and pretending you don't notice. If you let the horror in, if you truly acknowledge the depth of your degradation, you will break. You will lie down in the snow like Foster and let the hypothermia take you. So you dissociate. The young man who left Missouri with dreams of fortune is gone, buried under layers of soot and frozen elk blood. In his place is a creature of pure instinct. But somewhere, far to the east, the sun is beginning its slow climb back toward the northern hemisphere. You can feel a subtle shift in the light, a whisper that spring is not a myth. You cling to that whisper because the alternative is death. The wolves stop circling. For weeks, they were a constant, menacing periphery, always watching, always testing. You had grown accustomed to their presence, like the wind or the cold. But in late February, the detente ends. You are asleep, deep in the comatose slumber of the exhausted, when the screaming starts. It is not human. It is the high, terrified shriek of a horse, a sound so primal it bypasses your brain and hits your nervous system directly. You are on your feet before you are awake, rifle in hand. Jacob is beside you. William is slower, tangled in his robes. "The horses," Jacob says. and that is enough. You burst out of the cabin into the silver-blue moonlight. The scene at the lean-to is a nightmare in motion. 6 or 7 wolves, liquid shadows, have cornered your last 2 horses against the rock wall. It is a coordinated assault. One wolf darts in, snapping at a hamstring to off-balance the prey. As the horse kicks out, another wolf strikes the throat. They are not fighting, they are butchering. You raise your rifle. The shot cracks like a thunderclap in the frozen air. One wolf drops, a dark heap in the snow. The others dissolve into the tree line so fast they seem like smoke. But the damage is done. One horse is down, blood pumping onto the white snow in arterial spurts. Its eyes meet yours, terror, confusion, and then nothing. It is gone. One more lifeline severed. You stand over the dead horse, scanning the trees. They are still out there. You can feel their yellow eyes on you. You have 7 shots left. "We need to bring the other one inside," Jacob says. "Inside the cabin? Where else? Leave it out here and it's dead by morning. They know how to win now." He is right. Wolves are tactical learners. They found the weakness, and they will exploit it until the food source is depleted. So you do the unthinkable. You lead the surviving horse, shivering and bug-eyed, through the narrow door of your buried cabin. You tie her in the corner where William used to sleep. The cabin, already a claustrophobic pit of smoke and unwashed men, now smells of manure and horse sweat. But she is alive. "This is ridiculous," Jacob mutters, watching the horse nervously stomp the dirt floor. "We're rooming with livestock." "Better than starving," you reply. The horse snorts, blowing warm air into the room. William reaches out and strokes her nose, his touch gentle. It is the first time in months he has connected with something living. "She needs a name," William says softly. "If she's staying, she needs a name." "Hope," Jacob suggests. "Call her Hope. God knows we need some." It is sentimental and corny, but it sticks. Hope settles into the corner, chewing on the moss chinking. This is your life now, sleeping next to a horse, shoveling dung, and counting bullets. But in the midst of the squalor, there is a strange comfort in her breathing. The wolves are not deterred. They return the next night and the night after. You hear them scratching at the walls, sniffing the air vents. One night you wake to the sound of digging. They are trying to tunnel through the snowbank to the door. You grab a burning brand from the fire and throw the door open. 3 wolves are right there, 10 feet away. For a second, you lock eyes, firelight reflecting in theirs, before they vanish. Word spreads. Other camps are under siege. The pack is desperate, starving, and emboldened. They are no longer scavenging. They are hunting you, and winter still has teeth. The escalation isn't gradual. It is a sudden, violent shift in the valley's hierarchy. A trapper named Henderson wakes at dawn to find his corral empty. There is no theft, only slaughter. The wolves didn't just kill his last 2 horses, they erased them. The snow is stained with arterial spray, and all that remains is a macabre ossuary, skulls picked clean, and femurs cracked open for the nutrient-dense marrow. They ate the organs, the meat, and even the hide. Then the circle tightens. A Frenchman named Beaumont, a veteran of the high streams, loses his dog, a massive mastiff mix that had been his shadow for 6 years. Beaumont heard the snarls, but couldn't breach the snowdrift in time. He found the animal 50 yards from his door, steam still rising from a rib cage that had been hollowed out. He buried the remains and retreated into a silence that lasted 3 days. But the true horror arrives half a mile upstream. A trapper named Collins, already isolated after his partners succumb to carbon monoxide poisoning, fails to answer a check-in. The rescue party finds a cold hearth and an open door. Outside, the snow holds the forensic evidence of a nightmare. Collins had stepped out, perhaps to relieve himself, perhaps investigating a noise, and walked into an ambush. The tracks tell the story of a frantic, stumbling sprint through deep powder, flanked by the paw prints of pack hunters executing a pincer movement. The trail ends in a patch of churned crimson slush. They find his hat, his rifle, and a single shredded moccasin. The wolves dragged him into the dense timber. The men, wise enough not to follow a kill drag into the dark, turned back. Collins was never seen again. You hear the details around Jim Bridger's fire during a rare lull in the storms. Bridger recounts the events with the flat affect of a coroner. He doesn't offer comfort, he offers intelligence. The fear is gone, he says, his hand white-knuckling his Hawken rifle. Hunger burned it out of them. We aren't the apex predators here anymore. We're just slow elk. No one argues. You feel the truth of it in your gut. For decades, the equation was simple. Man has the gun, wolf runs away. But starvation is a powerful rewrite of natural law. It makes predators reckless and prey vulnerable. And right now, emaciated and buried in snow, you are the vulnerable ones. The protocols change immediately. Solitary movement is banned. Scavenging parties now consist of 3 men, 1 to dig, 2 to stand overwatch with hammers cocked, scanning the tree line. Bridger establishes a sonic communication system using rifle shots. 1 shot, assistance required. 2 shots, wolves sighted. 3 shots, fatality. Lately, the valley echoes with the sound of 3 shots more often than anyone can bear. The behavior of the pack shifts from avoidance to confrontation. They no longer bolt when you step outside. They hold their ground, yellow eyes fixed on you, calculating the energy expenditure required to bring you down versus the calories you provide. You stare back over iron sights, doing the same grim math. The theory becomes reality on a Tuesday afternoon. You are returning from a scavenging run with Jacob and William, your packs heavy with 15 pounds of frozen rabbit meat, a hard-won haul from hours of excavation. Suddenly, the path ahead is blocked. A dozen wolves flow out of the timber and form a skirmish line across the snow. They don't snarl, they don't charge, they simply stand there, a silent blockade between you and safety. Your heart hammers against your ribs like a trapped bird. The tactical situation is a disaster. 3 men, 12 wolves, and the overpowering scent of fresh meat leaking from your packs. They have been tracking you for miles, waiting for this specific bottleneck. Nobody run, Jacob hisses, his voice dropping an octave. You run, you trigger the chase instinct. We walk, slow, eyes front. What if they rush us? William whispers, his face the color of the snow. Then we drop the first 3 and pray the rest can't do math. You advance, 1 agonizing step at a time. The snow crunches loudly in the unnatural silence. The wolves watch you with an unnerving, relaxed confidence. 1 sits down and yawns, displaying a mouthful of ivory daggers. 15 feet, 10 feet. The alpha male stands directly in your vector. He is a ruin of a creature, matted, dirty fur, ribs sawing against his skin with every breath. He is starving, just like you. A jagged scar runs down his muzzle, twisting his lip into a permanent sneer. You stop. He doesn't flinch. The world collapses down to the space between you and this animal. You can see the cataracts of ice in his fur. You can see the biological machinery of his muscles tensing. But mostly, you see the intelligence. This isn't mindless rage, it is risk assessment. He knows what a rifle is. He has seen what it does. He is currently running a cost-benefit analysis. Is the meat in the pack and the meat on the bones worth a .50 caliber ball in the chest? For a terrifying eternity, nothing moves. You hear the wind, the creak of timber, and the shallow rasp of William's prayer. Then the Alpha makes a decision. He takes a single deliberate step to the left. The line breaks. The pack parts like the Red Sea, creating a corridor barely wide enough for a man to squeeze through. You walk the gauntlet. You are close enough to smell the rot on their breath, close enough to touch the coarse guard hairs of their coats. You keep your eyes locked forward, refusing to engage, refusing to look like a victim. And then you are past them. You reach the cabin, stumble through the door, and bar it shut. Only then does the adrenaline crash hit. Your hands shake so violently you nearly drop your rifle. "Why?" William gasps, sliding to the floor. "Why didn't they take us?" "He was weighing the odds," Jacob says, staring at the door. "He decided the cost was too high today, but the math changes tomorrow." That night, you clean your rifle with obsessive-compulsive precision. You count your ammunition. 6 shots, enough to kill half the pack, but not enough to survive the retaliation. In the corner, Hope the horse shifts nervously, smelling the predator scent clinging to your leathers. You used to believe the stories, the dime novel legends of the mountain man as the invincible lord of the wilderness. The wolves have dismantled that vanity. As you listen to the wind howl, you realize the hierarchy has been restored. You aren't a conqueror. You are just another mammal shivering in a burrow, hoarding calories, hoping to not be eaten before the sun comes up. It is a terrifying realization, but also a liberating one. The pretense is gone. You don't have to be a hero. You just have to be a survivor. You pull the buffalo robe over your head, grip your rifle, and listen to the soft, rhythmic padding of paws circling your shelter. They are out there planning their next move. But so are you. March arrives not as a reprieve, but as an executioner. The storms of January were bad. The blizzard that hits in the first week of March is biblical. Winds scream down the valley at 60, 70 miles an hour, stripping the insulation from your roof. The cabin groans under the assault, timber popping like gunshots. At one point, the door bows inward so violently you brace for the collapse. It holds. You spend 3 days huddled inside, burning through your wood supply, listening to the world end. When the wind finally dies, you dig out into an alien landscape. Drifts have piled 15 feet high. The horse shelter is gone, buried. The paths between cabins have been erased. The valley looks less like Wyoming and more like the surface of a frozen moon. Bridger convenes a meeting 2 days later. The casualty report is grim. 2 cabins collapsed under the new snow load, killing 1 man and crushing another. But the real crisis is caloric. The frozen carcasses you had been mining are now buried under an additional 6 feet of drift. Locating them is impossible. You need fresh meat, living game, and the only place that exists is in the lower valleys, miles away through snow deep enough to swallow a man whole. Bridger asks for volunteers. It is a suicide mission, but the alternative is watching the camp starve to death one by one. You raise your hand. So does Jacob. William stays behind. He is too weak to walk, his face a mask of shame and relief. "I'll be here when you get back," he whispers. You don't tell him that back is a theoretical concept at this point. There are 6 of you. Bridger shakes your hand before you leave, his grip hard. He says nothing because there is nothing to say. You strap on your snowshoes and walk into the white. The first day is deceptive. You make 8 miles following the frozen spine of the river, camping in a stand of pines. But the second day betrays you. The sky turns the color of a bruised plum, and by early afternoon, the snow begins. Not flurries, heavy, wet flakes that obscure the horizon. "We need to turn back," Hawkins yells. He is an older trapper, a veteran of 12 winters, and he looks terrified. "We turn back, the camp starves," Jacob shouts over the rising wind. "We push through." The argument consumes precious time. The snow thickens, and then, with the sudden violence of a door slamming, the storm hits. Visibility drops to 0. The wind is a physical blow, driving ice crystals into your skin like shrapnel. The cold isn't just a temperature, it is a presence, stripping the heat from your core in minutes. "Stay together!" someone screams. You grab Jacob's coat. The 6 of you form a human chain, stumbling blind through the whiteout, searching for shelter that doesn't exist. "Snow cave!" Jacob roars, his mouth against your ear. "Dig!" You drop to your knees and begin to burrow. The snow is crusted hard by the wind, but you claw at it with numb hands, scooping out a hole like a frantic animal. Your body screams for rest. Every instinct tells you to lie down and sleep, to let the snow cover you. But you know that sleep is a lie. You carve a chamber 4 feet deep, just big enough for 2 men. You and Jacob crawl inside, dragging your packs. You block the entrance with a block of snow, leaving a fist-sized hole for air. The wind outside is muffled instantly, replaced by a suffocating silence. The temperature inside is marginally better, perhaps 10 degrees instead of 20 below, but the darkness is absolute, and the cold has followed you in. "Fire," Jacob slurs. His voice is thick, the early sign of severe hypothermia. "Need fire." You fumble for your flint and steel. Your hands are clumsy blocks of wood, refusing to obey your brain. You strike the flint. No spark. You try again. Nothing. Your fingers are too stiff to create the friction. "Can't," you mumble. Your lips feel like rubber. Jacob tries to take the kit. His hands are worse, white, waxen claws. He drops the steel into the snow floor and fumbles for it, but his fingers can't find purchase. Panic flutters in your chest, slow and dull. You are dying. Both of you. The cold is shutting down the machinery. Your thoughts are getting fuzzy, drifting away from fear toward a dangerous, comfortable apathy. You just want to close your eyes. You just want to sleep. A seductive lethargy begins to set in. The cold is no longer painful. It is a warm, heavy blanket whispering that it is time to sleep. This is the paradoxical undressing phase of hypothermia, the final stage before the heart stops. Part of you wants to give in. It would be so easy to just close your eyes and drift into the black. But a primal lizard brain instinct overrides the surrender. You locate the flint and steel. Your hands are foreign objects, clumsy blocks of frozen meat that refuse to obey your commands. You strike the steel, once, twice, 10 times. The sparks die in the freezing air before they can kiss the tinder. You are going to die in a snow hole because you cannot perform the most basic task of the Stone Age. Refusing to accept this, you strip off your mittens. Your hands are the color of tallow, waxy and stiff. You cup them over your mouth and blow, forcing warm breath onto the frost-bitten skin. The reaction is immediate and agonizing, a burning sensation like plunging your hands into a vat of acid. This is the blood forcing its way back into collapsed capillaries. The pain is excruciating, but it is the pain of life. You try again. A spark lands. It glows, fading fast. You blow on it with the tenderness of a mother bird. It catches a single blade of dried grass. The smoke curls, then a tiny tongue of orange flame appears. You feed it scrap by scrap, shredded cloth, gunpowder wrapping, twigs. The fire takes hold. It is small and smoky, but it pushes the death back a few inches. You and Jacob huddle over the heat, gasping as sensation returns to your extremities. The firelight flickers against the snow walls, turning your claustrophobic tomb into something almost cozy. Hours drift by in a haze of semi-consciousness. You feed the fire with anything that will burn: leather laces, tool handles, debris from your pockets. Suddenly, Jacob starts to laugh. It's a dry, rattling sound. "What?" you croak. "I just realized," he wheezes, "if we die in here, the ice preserves us. 1,000 years from now, some archaeologist digs us up. They'll stare at us and wonder what the hell we were doing." "Trying not to die," you murmur. "Maybe they'll think it was a ritual," he continues, eyes glassy. "Sacrifices to the snow gods." "The snow gods can go to hell," you say. "I'm pretty sure this is hell." You both laugh, the skin on your faces cracking with the effort. "You know what I'm thinking about?" Jacob whispers later, staring into the embers. A tub, a galvanized tin tub in front of a hearth, water so hot it scalds you, steam filling the room. Do you remember what heat feels like? "I remember," you lie. You can barely recall the sensation of warmth without pain. "First thing I do when we get back, I'm boiling myself like a lobster." The storm breaks at dawn. The wind vanishes, leaving behind a silence so profound it rings in your ears. You punch through the snow-blocked door and emerge into a transformed world. The drifts are mountainous, the sky a flat, indifferent gray. You search the immediate area. Miraculously, the others made it. Hawkins and Peters dug a cave of their own. 2 others found a windbreak behind a granite slab and let the snow bury them. 6 men went into the whiteout, 6 men crawled out. It is a statistical anomaly, a stroke of luck you didn't earn. But the mission is a total failure. The blizzard has pushed you miles off course, burned through your caloric reserves, and nearly killed the strongest among you. To push forward now would be suicide. You turn back toward the main camp, empty-handed and defeated. The return journey is a 2-day slog through fresh powder that fights you for every step. There is no conversation. You don't have the breath to spare. You are simply a line of ragged figures stumbling through a white wasteland. The physical toll becomes undeniable. Your feet are swollen logs of fluid and pain inside your boots. Jacob keeps staring at his left hand. The tips of 2 fingers have turned black, necrosis setting in. If he survives the hunger, he will lose those fingers in the spring. Hawkins has developed a wet, rattling cough that sounds like fluid in the lungs. You are rotting while you walk. When the thin columns of smoke marking the main camp finally appear on the horizon, the relief is so intense it brings tears to your frozen eyes. Home! It is a hole in the ground filled with smoke, soot, and the stench of horse manure, but it is the only sanctuary you have. William meets you at the door. One look at your empty packs and his face collapses. He has withered in your absence, his cheekbones threatening to slice through his paper-thin skin. He looks like a specter haunting his own clothes. "No game," Jacob says flatly. William nods, stepping aside. The fire is warm. You collapse onto the pine bough mattress. The needles dig into your back, a familiar discomfort. The air is foul, thick with the smell of unwashed bodies and the horse in the corner, but it is warm. You close your eyes and fall into a coma-like sleep, dreaming of green valleys and baking bread, torturous visions of a life that feels like it belonged to a different man. Time dissolves. The calendar you scratched into the log wall back in November is abandoned. The days have blurred into a single seamless loop of endurance. Wake, scrape the soot from the chimney, eat a mouthful of dried meat, stare into the dark, sleep. It is mid-March, perhaps. The food supply has stabilized at critical. You are surviving on a handful of scavenged scraps and a small ration of pemmican that Bridger distributed from the company stores. It isn't enough to live on, but it is just enough to keep you from dying. You exist in a twilight state, waiting for the sun to change the world. The food supply stabilizes not because you have plenty, but because your body has accepted starvation as the baseline. You are alive, but you are not living. Your body has begun the grim process of catabolism, consuming its own muscle tissue for fuel. Your biceps and thighs, once corded with the strength of a working trapper, have dissolved into rope and sinew. Your ribs are a washboard beneath your skin. When you catch your reflection in the water bucket, a stranger stares back, a skull draped in parchment, eyes sunk deep into dark sockets. Jacob is deteriorating faster. The necrosis on his frost-bitten fingers has advanced. The black tips are weeping a foul-smelling fluid. He keeps them wrapped in rags, hiding the rot, but you can see the agony in his eyes every time he moves his hands. William has retreated into a fugue state. Physically, he is a skeleton wrapped in a buffalo robe. Mentally, he is in Ohio. He holds long, fractured conversations with the ghosts of his past, his dead mother, a lost brother, and Sarah, the girl he promised to marry. You don't interrupt him. His hallucinations are a mercy you can't offer. The horse died 3 days ago. Hope, as you named her, finally succumbed to the darkness. When you found her collapsed, her breath shallow and rattling, you felt a shameful wave of relief. You butchered her with efficiency, adding the meat to the stockpile. The cabin feels cavernous without her. The sound of her breathing and the shifting of her hooves had been a subtle anchor. Now the silence is heavier. William took it the hardest. He sits staring at the empty corner, his imaginary conversations silenced by grief. "She was a good horse," you say, the words landing flatly. Jacob tries to bridge the gap. "She kept us alive, in more ways than one." William looks up, his eyes red. "Do horses go to heaven?" It is a child's question, innocent and heartbreaking. "If there is a heaven," you lie gently, "it has green fields, endless oats, and no winter."
William nods, accepting the fiction. The next morning he resumes his whispers to Sarah. "You are grateful. The madness is better than the silence." To keep the madness at bay, you invent distractions. Jacob teaches you a card game from New Orleans, played with a deck so greasy the suits are invisible. You bet imaginary fortunes, bluffing with the reckless abandon of men who have nothing to lose. William discovers a talent for art. He uses charred sticks from the fire to sketch on the hewn logs, crude charcoal memories of home, Sarah's face, hope running in a meadow. They aren't masterpieces, but they are proof of life. You tell stories, fractured fairy tales, bawdy jokes from the rendezvous, plots of novels half remembered, anything to fill the void, anything to remind yourselves that you are men, not just animals dying in a hole. But the fear is always there. You know what happens when the mind breaks before the body. You remember stories of cabin fever, men who turned on each other with hatchets over a missing piece of jerky, or who walked into the snow convinced they could hear church bells. You remember Jennings, a trapper who went mad 2 winters ago, convinced his partners were stealing his rations. He shot one and watched the other die, then sat with the corpses until the thaw, gibbering at the walls.
You watch Jacob sometimes, wondering if he is looking at you with the same suspicion. You feel the edges of your own sanity fraying, hours spent staring at a knot in the wood, or sudden hot surges of irrational rage. You breathe through it. You focus on the sensory details, the scratch of wool, the smell of smoke, the sound of your own heart. Jacob narrates his life to stay tethered. Now I am feeding the fire. Now I am checking the powder. It used to annoy you. Now you understand it is a survival tactic. Jim Bridger visits one afternoon. He is a ghost of his former self, clothes hanging off a skeletal frame, beard wild, eyes rimmed in red. "How are you boys holding up?" he asks, his voice rasping. You shrug. The question is rhetorical. He accepts a cup of hot water and cradles it like whiskey. Lost Harrison last night. Went to sleep. Didn't wake up. Harrison was 40, a bull of a man who seemed indestructible. Now he is just another frozen lump of meat. "How many?" Jacob asks. Bridger stares into the fire. 12, maybe 13. Hard to know. Some cabins I can't reach. 12 dead out of 30, a 40% casualty rate, and spring is still a rumor. "Anyone talking about leaving?" you ask. Bridger shakes his head. "Where would they go? The passes are blocked. Walking out now is just a complicated way to commit suicide." He stands up, groaning as his joints protest. He looks aged, a man eroded by the season. "Hang on," he says, his hand on the door latch. "Just hang on." "Just hold on," Bridger rasps before he leaves. "Spring always comes. Sometimes it just takes its time." He departs, leaving a vacuum where hope used to be. The silence in the cabin is oppressive. In the gloom, your mind wanders to Harrison, the bull-strong trapper who died in his sleep, and the 12 others Bridger counted. You think of the men in the remote cabins, the ones no one has heard from in weeks, frozen in their bunks, waiting for a thaw they will never feel. Why are you still breathing when Harrison isn't? It's a question without an answer. The mountains are indifferent executioners. They kill capriciously, leaving the survivors to search for meaning in the chaos. Night falls, turning the cabin's gray interior to absolute black. You listen to the rhythmic breathing of your cellmates. Jacob sleeps like the dead, a skill he's mastered. William murmurs in his sleep, a low, incomprehensible stream of consciousness. Outside, the wind has lost some of its fury, settling into a low moan. You lie on the pine boughs and torture yourself with memories of Missouri, the yeasty smell of baking bread, the sound of chickens scratching in the dust, a world of warmth and color that feels like a hallucination. When you rode west 3 years ago, you were just a boy on the Grand Tour, planning to make a quick fortune and return home to buy a farm. That boy is dead. The mountains have eroded him, replacing his optimism with scar tissue. Even if you walk out of this valley, you will never be the same. The cold has rewritten your DNA. The next day brings a miracle. It isn't spring, but it is a reprieve. A warm wind from the west, a chinook, rolls over the peaks before dawn. When you wake, the air feels soft against your skin. You push open the door and blink in the blinding light. The temperature has rocketed upward, 30 degrees in a few hours. The cabin roof is weeping. Water drips from the icicles, sparkling in the pale sun. Plip, plip, plip. It is the first musical sound you have heard in months. You step outside. The air is maybe 40 degrees, but to your frozen nerves, it feels tropical. You close your eyes and let the warmth soak into your pores. Jacob shuffles up beside you. He stares at the melting ice, his face unreadable. But there is a spark in his eyes, not quite hope, but the absence of despair. "Chinook," you say. "Won't last," he grunts. "Never does." Still, the word hangs there, still. It is proof that the winter is not infinite. The warm wind draws the survivors out of their holes. For the first time in weeks, the valley shows signs of life. Men emerge from the buried mounds, squinting in the light like moles. They gather near Bridger's cabin, a dozen ragged scarecrows in filth-stiffened furs. You join them. The faces are familiar, but changed, hollowed out, eyes sunken, beards matted. No one asks about the missing. No one mentions the empty spaces in the circle. To name the dead is to invite them in. Bridger stands in the center, surveying his decimated command. "A few more weeks," he says quietly. "Maybe a month. Then the pass opens. Then we move." A month sounds like an eternity. But as you look at the skeletal figures around you, you know the count isn't finished. The winter will take its tithe before it leaves. The Chinook lasts 3 days. Then, as predicted, the hammer drops again. The temperature plunges, freezing the meltwater into treacherous sheets of ice. But the psychological spell is broken. The snowpack has settled. The light lingers a little longer each evening. The door has cracked open. The true thaw arrives in the second week of April. It isn't a tease this time. The sun climbs higher, burning with a new intensity. The white prison that has held you since November begins to collapse. You wake one morning to a sound so alien you think you are hallucinating. Bird song, actual sparrows trilling in the trees. You open the door, and there they are, small brown shapes hopping through the slush. The melt is rapid and violent. Drifts that were 15 feet high shrink to 3. The paths reappear as rivers of mud. The Green River, silent for months under its armor of ice, breaks free with a roar, sending white blocks spinning downstream. But as the snow retreats, it reveals its secrets. The valley is a graveyard, and the thaw is the exhumation. The first body you find is Cooper. He vanished in February during a supply run. You find him face down in a drift that has melted to his waist, his arm outstretched as if reaching for a door that wasn't there. You and Jacob dig him out. He is perfectly preserved, his face peaceful. You bury him in a shallow grave, piling rocks over him to thwart the wolves. Cooper had a wife and 2 daughters in Virginia. He used to show you a lock of their blonde hair kept in a pouch. You search his body, but the pouch is gone, lost to the snow or scavenged by animals. Then you move on. There are more markers to find. 3 more men are scattered across the valley floor, victims of exposure, exhaustion, or disorientation. You bury them where they fell. It is grim work, but necessary. You are cleaning the house of the dead. The snow recedes like a slow, dirty tide, spitting out the things it swallowed over the last 5 months. It gives up the dead in fragments, a boot heel here, a frozen hand there, faces turned upward to the indifferent sun. One of the first you find is Henderson. He was the man whose horses were devoured by wolves in a single night. He survived that loss and weeks of starvation, only to fall at the finish line. You find him sitting against a ponderosa pine, his rifle resting across his knees. He is frozen solid, his eyes open, looking for all the world like a man who just stopped to catch his breath and decided not to get up. Then there is the kid, the greenhorn, whose name you never actually learned. He joined the brigade in September, his gear shiny and new, asking 1,000 questions about how to skin a beaver or read a trail. You remember being annoyed by his enthusiasm. Now he lies in a high meadow, spread-eagled. There are no marks of violence on him. His heart likely just surrendered to the cold in his sleep. You close his eyes and mutter the same hollow words you said for Cooper. You keep walking because there are cabins to check, and the silence coming from them is heavy. The first cabin you investigate belongs to the Pennsylvania brothers. They came west to build a fur empire. You force the door open, the leather hinges cracking. Inside, it is a tomb. The brothers are in their bunks, buffalo robes pulled to their chins, their skin the color of old parchment. The hearth is cold, filled with ash that hasn't seen a spark in weeks. The woodpile is empty. You see the evidence of their final desperate days. The table is gone. The stools are missing. Even the door frame has been hacked away. They burned their furniture to stay alive, and when there was nothing left to burn, the cold walked in and took them. You recognize Thomas Mitchell. He was a sharp card player who took $10 off you at the rendezvous. Now he looks peaceful, almost smiling. You wonder if the hypothermia gave him one last warm dream before the end. Should we say something? Jacob asks, his voice trembling. Like what? A prayer, something. You dig into your memory for the liturgy of your childhood. The words feel rusty in your throat, small and insignificant against the silence of the mountains. You mark the door with a cairn of stones. Someone will have to come back with shovels when the ground fully thaws. The second silent cabin is worse. You don't even make it inside. As soon as you crack the latch, a smell hits you. A thick, sweet, cloying stench of advanced decay that the cold could only slow, not stop. There are 4 men in there. They have been dead a long time. You slam the door shut. You pile rocks in front of it. Some things do not need to be seen. Some nightmares do not need to be etched into your memory. You walk away, breathing through your mouth, trying to clear the taste of death from your tongue. Jim Bridger acts as the coroner. He carries a small, grease-stained ledger where he usually tracks beaver plues and trade goods. Now he is tallying souls. 18. That is the final count. 18 men dead out of the 30 who rode north in September, a casualty rate of 60%. Some you knew intimately, others were just faces by a campfire. But every tick mark in Bridger's book represents a grieving widow in St. Louis, a father in Ohio, or a child who will wait forever for a papa who isn't coming home. When the mud is finally passable, the survivors congregate at Bridger's camp. It is a reunion of the damned. There are only 13 of you left. You look around the circle and barely recognize the men standing there. These aren't the swaggering mountain men of legend. These are revenants. Their bodies have cannibalized themselves, cheekbones jutting like blades, eyes huge and haunted, clothes hanging off skeletal frames like scarecrows. Jacob stands beside you, his left hand wrapped in filthy, stiff bandages. A trapper named Wells, who once studied medicine, has examined the fingers. The necrosis is too deep. 2 of them will have to be amputated with a heated knife and a saw. Jacob accepted the news with a shrug. 2 fingers is a bargain price for your life. William stands at the fringe of the group. Physically, he is there. Mentally, he is gone. He stares at the horizon, his lips moving in a silent, frantic conversation with the dead. The winter broke something in his mind that the spring cannot fix. Bridger has already arranged for him to be escorted back east as soon as the pass opens. Bridger addresses the group. He looks ancient, his voice raspy from months of smoke inhalation. "We made it," he says. "Those of us standing here, we made it." There is no cheering, no hats thrown in the air. The victory is too costly to celebrate. "The pass is open in 3 weeks," Bridger continues. "We rest, we eat. There is game in the valley now. We get our strength back. Then we head for the Green River Rendezvous." The concept of next month is jarring. For 5 months, your time horizon has been measured in hours. Suddenly, the future has reopened, vast and terrifying. But the biology of the valley is resetting. With the thaw comes the migration. First, the elk, great bulls with velvet antlers descending from the high country to graze on the new shoots. Then the mule deer, the rabbits, the grouse. It is as if the earth is apologizing for its cruelty, flooding the zone with life. William stands at the fringe of the group. Physically, he is there. Mentally, he is gone. He stares at the horizon, his lips moving in a silent, frantic conversation with the dead. The winter broke something in his mind that the spring cannot fix. Bridger has already arranged for him to be escorted back east as soon as the pass opens. Bridger addresses the group. He looks ancient, his voice raspy from months of smoke inhalation. "We made it," he says. "Those of us standing here, we made it." There is no cheering, no hats thrown in the air. The victory is too costly to celebrate. "The pass is open in 3 weeks," Bridger continues. "We rest, we eat. There is game in the valley now. We get our strength back. Then we head for the Green River Rendezvous." The concept of next month is jarring. For 5 months, your time horizon has been measured in hours. Suddenly, the future has reopened, vast and terrifying. But the biology of the valley is resetting. With the thaw comes the migration. First, the elk, great bulls with velvet antlers descending from the high country to graze on the new shoots. Then the mule deer, the rabbits, the grouse. It is as if the earth is apologizing for its cruelty, flooding the zone with life. For the first time since November, you feel something approximating happiness. It isn't joy. The winter took too much for that. But it is a quiet, warm gratitude. The constellations are the same ones you watched in September, but they look different now. Sharper, colder. You understand them in a way you didn't before. The stars don't care. The mountains don't care. The universe is vast and indifferent. It does not mourn your failures or celebrate your survival. You are just another mammal scratching for calories on a spinning rock. And when you die, the snow will still fall. Strangely, this thought is liberating. If the universe doesn't care, then you get to decide what matters. You choose to live. You choose to carry the memory of the 18 men who didn't. You choose to ensure the winter of 1836 doesn't vanish into silence. That is enough. The days lengthen. Green shoots push through the mud, tentative at first, then exploding across the hillsides. The air smells of wet earth and resurrection. You spend the weeks recovering, eating as much as you can hold, walking short distances to rehabilitate your atrophied muscles, and mending gear that is worn thin. You sort through your catch one afternoon. The beaver pelts you trapped in the fall are still there, preserved by the cold. It's a small haul, maybe $300 worth if the market holds. $300 for 6 months of hell, for eating your own moccasins and burying your friends. It seems absurdly low, but you are breathing, and 18 other men are not. The math has to work. Bridger announces it one morning. The passes are open. A scout fought through the last drifts and confirmed the route is clear. It is time to move. You pack your meager belongings, rifle, traps, pelts, and a few tools. You stand before the cabin one last time. In the harsh spring light, it looks pathetic, a gray, sagging hole in the ground that smells of rot and smoke. It was a prison, a tomb, and a cradle. It saved your life. Jacob joins you. His hand is freshly bandaged. Wells amputated the 2 necrotic fingers yesterday with a heated knife. Jacob barely flinched. "You ready?" he asks. "Yeah, I'm ready." You turn your back on the winter and start walking east. Behind you, the cabin sits empty, waiting for the next desperate soul, or simply for the earth to reclaim it. The journey to the Green River Rendezvous takes 3 weeks. It is a slow, limping procession through a world waking up. The meadows are violently green. The streams run clear and cold. After months of monochrome gray, the colors hurt your eyes. You hunt as you go, rebuilding your body's protein by protein. Jacob learns to handle his rifle with 8 fingers, adjusting his grip without complaint. "Could have been my whole arm," he says by the fire one night. "Could have been my life." William travels with the group, but exists in a separate reality. He walks when told, eats when fed, but his eyes are fixed on a horizon only he can see. The 2 men assigned to watch him ensure he doesn't wander off, but his mind has already left. You tried to talk to him once. He looked at you like a stranger speaking a foreign tongue. You don't try again. By early July, you reach the Green River Valley. Summer is in full swing, and the winter feels like a fever dream, a nightmare that happened to someone else. But your body remembers. Your legs ache. Your clothes hang loose. The rendezvous is already underway. You see the smoke of hundreds of campfires, the tents, the horses. The smell hits you next, a potent mix of whiskey, roasting meat, and unwashed humanity. After months of breathing soot and horse manure, it smells like civilization. But something is wrong. The atmosphere is heavy. The gathering is smaller than last year. Fewer tents, fewer traders, fewer laughs. The carnival spirit is muted, like a party where half the guests failed to arrive. You walk through the camp, scanning the faces. You look for Thompson, the arm wrestler. Gone. You look for the singing French-Canadian brothers. Gone. You look for old Martinez, a fixture since 1825. Gone. Some died in the winter, frozen in their cabins or buried in drifts. Some gave up the life, retreating to the settlements before the snow fell. Some just vanished, their fates written in snow that has long since melted. The rendezvous, usually a celebration of survival, feels this year like a wake. The era is ending. You can feel it in the low prices the traders offer for your beaver plues. You can see it in the empty spaces around the fires. The mountains didn't just kill men this winter, they killed the dream. But you are here. You made it. You sell your pelts. You buy a drink. And for the first time in a long time, you dance. Not because you are happy, but because you promised you would. And promises are all you have left. Not everyone died. Some simply vanished from the ledger of the mountains. They packed their mules in May, turned their backs on the high country, and rode east toward the settlements, trading the freedom of the wilderness for the safety of a plow or a clerk's desk. The mountains have been hemorrhaging men for years, a slow leak of talent and grit. You realize now that the trappers are becoming as scarce as the beaver they hunt. You just didn't notice the silence until the noise of the rendezvous failed to fill it. Jim Bridger is holding court by a fire, flanked by company men. Nearby sits Osborne Russell, a young, thoughtful trapper who recently left the Columbia River Fishing and Trading Company to go independent. He has a journal balanced on his knee, scratching ink onto paper, capturing a history that is dissolving in real time. You claim a patch of grass near the Green River. You build a fire. You lie down. And for the first time since September, you let your guard down completely. That night, the seal breaks. As the jugs of Pass Brandy, a harsh burning mix of alcohol and honey, circle the fires, the stories spill out. The survivors of the winter of 1836 begin to compare notes, piecing together a mosaic of the apocalypse. Your brigade's casualty count, 18 out of 30, is horrific, but you weren't alone in the dark. A group from the Upper Yellowstone reports only 3 survivors out of 12. A lone wolf who wintered near the Wind River Range survived 6 weeks in a cave eating nothing but rock chucks, marmots, and his own boiled moccasins. He pulls off his boots to show the group his feet. 3 toes are missing, gnawed off by frostbite. He laughs about it, a high, jagged sound that makes the hair on your arms stand up. Another man stares into his cup and tells of watching wolves drag his partner into the timber. He was out of powder, too weak to lift his rifle, forced to watch from the doorway as his friend was disassembled alive. Then there is the man who ate his dog, a hound he'd raised from a pup, a creature that slept at his feet for 8 years. When the food ran out, the dog was the only calorie source left. "I wept while I cut his throat," he whispers, "and I wept while I roasted him." But the man is alive, sustained one last time by the loyalty of his beast. The math is ugly. Across the various brigades, perhaps 50 men are dead. It is worse than the hard winter of 1830, worse than the deep freeze of 1833. It is the kind of season that becomes folklore, a dark legend told to greenhorns for decades, growing more grotesque with every retelling. As you listen, you recognize the universal architecture of the nightmare. The buried cabins, the rancid fat lamps, the boiled leather, the siege of the wolves. You all learned the same brutal curriculum. Survival, you realize, isn't about strength. It isn't about bravery. It is about stubbornness. It is the willingness to endure degradation that would break a civilized man. It is eating your boots. It is burning your family heirlooms for 5 minutes of heat. It is digging through 6 feet of snow to steal meat from a dead elk. The men sitting around this fire aren't heroes. They are simply the ones who refused to die. The line separating them from the corpses in the silent cabins is so thin it is transparent. The rendezvous lasts 2 weeks, but the celebration is hollow. You trade your hard-won pelts for supplies, powder, lead, coffee, sugar, but the return is meager. The market has softened. The company buyers look apologetic but firm. Beaver is out, they say. Silk is in. In the fashion capitals of London and Paris, the beaver felt hat has been replaced by the shimmering silk top hat. The demand that drove men into the Rockies for 20 years is evaporating. The trade is dying. The old-timers like Bridger and Russell see the writing on the wall. They talk about the early days, the 1820s, like ancient history, a time when the streams were choked with fur and the wilderness felt infinite. Now the streams are trapped out, the prices are crashing, and the era of the mountain man is ending. One evening you sit by the river, watching the water turn to liquid gold in the twilight. You are at a crossroads. Do you stay? Do you chase the last few beaver into the most remote canyons? Do you head east to Missouri and try to resurrect the life you left behind? Do you push west to California, a land of rumors and eternal summer? For the first time in your adult life, you have no plan. The mountains were supposed to be a chapter, not the whole book, but the ink has stained you. Bridger wanders over and sits beside you. He is silent for a long time, chewing on a blade of grass. "Hell of a winter," he says finally. "Hell of a winter," you agree. "You heading back out next fall?" You look at the peaks rising purple in the distance. You remember the cold, the hunger, the madness of the long dark, but then you remember the other things. The smell of aspen smoke in October, the adrenaline of the hunt, the absolute intoxicating freedom of walking where no map has ever been drawn. The wilderness doesn't care about you, but you realize with a jolt that you love it anyway. "Yeah," you say, "I reckon I am." Bridger nods. "Good. We need steady hands. The world is changing, son. Another 10 years, there won't be any trappers left, just farmers and soldiers and missionaries fencing off the sky." "Does that bother you?" "Some," he admits, "but I had my time. I saw things no one else will ever see. Can't ask for more than that." The rendezvous breaks up in late July. The city of canvas dissolves, and the trappers scatter like seeds back into the wind. You throw in with a small brigade heading north. There are new faces among them, replacements for the dead. They are young, eager, and convinced of their own immortality. They remind you of yourself 3 years and a lifetime ago. You don't tell them about the winter of 1836. They will learn the lesson on their own, or they won't, and the snow will cover their mistakes. As you hike toward the tree line, the peaks rise above you, ancient, granite, and indifferent. They were here before the fur trade, and they will be here long after the last trap rusts away. But you will remember. That is your burden and your privilege now. You are the keeper of the names. Harrison, Cooper, the Mitchell brothers, Thomas, the boy whose name you never learned. As long as you walk these trails, they are not entirely gone. The winter of 1836 happened. It broke men, it killed men, and it forged the ones who remained into something harder than iron. You adjust your pack. The sun is warm on your shoulders. The trail stretches out ahead, winding through wildflowers and pine forests, leading toward a stream that might still hold a fortune. But fortune doesn't matter anymore. You put one foot in front of the other, you keep moving, you keep living, and out here, that is the only victory that counts.